welcome back to part 2 of drop shotting. Fairly interesting and exciting technique to use for all types of bass. Every single type of bass, and probably every single type of fish that swims could be caught using some other version of a drop shot rig. Very versatile. The nice thing about it is you can change it up or down or sideways or whatever way you wanted to, just by adjusting hook size and sinker size and bait size, like we've discussed. Any type of bait. Part 2 of drop shotting. Let's get into it, guys. If you're fishing off the bank, that's slightly different, but off the boat, drop shotting is a vertical presentation. So let's talk about where we can fish the drop shot rig. And again, guys, this is not a deal where that is the only place you can use it, or that is the only place you can use it. There's obviously things that drop shot rigs, even if you rig them Texas rig the way that I showed you, or Texposed the way that I showed you, there's still a good chance that they're going to get stuck. So things like bushes, they don't like bushes very much. It's usually the sinker that gets stuck, and then you end up losing the sinker. But sometimes even the hook will get stuck. Remember, it's out horizontal on a line that's going straight up and down. And so, although it's not tight, when it comes over something, there's a good chance that it could roll and just the hook could get stuck. So they don't like bushes, thick bushes. They don't like super thick vegetation. But of course you can fish around the vegetation or pitch to holes in the vegetation. So if we have a look at this map here, you can pretty much say this entire map. But let's look at a few specific scenarios. In a previous video, we've said that these are likely spawning areas that are indicated here in green. So there's a couple of docks in these areas here. Let's say for this video that these yellow things here are rocks that are indicated on the map. So, and we've been and had a look, and we've found that there's some patches of gravel scattered in amongst here. There's some vegetation, tules, reeds, that kind of thing. Remember, this is our perfect lake that we are talking about here. So in the spring, in the pre-spawn, you would find fish holding in slightly deeper water. On this map, let's say that water is 12 to 15 feet, just off our spawning areas. And what happens before the spawn is that you will get groups of the little males or buck bass will move into the shallow, and they'll start looking for areas where they can make their nests. The female bass will be slower to come shallow, and they will hold in these slightly deeper areas here, let's say 12 to 15 feet on this map, and they will feed heavily before the spawn. These are areas where you can go and probably catch your biggest fish of the year if that's something that you thought that you could accomplish on your lake. So if you know that fish are spawning on these banks here, the deeper water off these banks is a good place to go and target them, to go and look for them, and they're usually not alone. Obviously docks are great because you can pitch to the docks, or even cast the drop shot rig to the docks and work it back to the boat if you wanted to. Guys, it doesn't really matter. We've said that showed you the big rig that you could use in the summer, big ledges out here on the main lake. There's a creek, as we always say. There's a roadbed there. High areas or high points on the lake where you've got sloping banks into deep water with high points. Beautiful. You can cast around all of those. Big flat areas here where you could vertically drop shot like we've just explained and target specific fish. It's a very versatile rig, and we've mentioned a couple of types of cover that they don't really like. Can you fish them around timber? Absolutely, you can fish them around timber. Pitch them to the bases of the trees, the standing timber that you can see. Can you fish them around laydowns or blowdowns? Yes, you can, as long as the branches are not too thick. You could absolutely do that if you were careful about it. I may, in that scenario, go to the bigger rig. I may go to a heavier rig because now we are now fishing around cover. It's not an open water situation. So rock, riprap, timber, gravel banks, clay banks, big boulders. Choose your baits accordingly, choose your tackle accordingly, as we've explained, and go for it. There's no rules, guys. What about the retrieve? What are we doing with the retrieve? Well, there's a couple of things that we can do here. Like I said, with the standard drop shot rig, it is a vertical presentation. If you're fishing out of a boat, most of the time you are trying to cast a fish that you can see or you think that you can see on your sonar. So it's very much an up and down thing. You would cast out from the boat or pitch out from the boat if it's close to the boat, and you would let the sinker go all the way down to the bottom and then just pop it up and down and just shake the rod tip or move the rod tip. Another technique that you can do is to drag the drop shot. So the same way you would fish a Carolina rig is would fire it out, and you would probably use a slightly heavier sinker for this technique so you can maintain bottom contact. And let's say for this scenario, we were throwing it down past a dock or parallel to a dock. These little yellow things here are the docks on this map. You would fire it down the dock and then wind, drag, pause. Wind, drag, pause. Or some version of that retrieve. What about the bite? What does the bite feel like? The bite with a drop shot is quite tricky to explain. Sometimes it's so violent that it feels like they want to take the rod away from you. That is not the case all the time. When you're drop shotting, what happens quite a bit of the time is, as the bait and sinker are sinking down to the bottom, the fish are coming up to meet it. So you'll be kind of feeling your way down to the bottom with your line, letting it sink, maybe paying line off the reel, and all of a sudden it's stopped moving and you know that it still should be sinking. And then you look at your line and maybe see the line is moving off to the side. Another type of bite that you get with a drop shot is where the bait is on the bottom and you'll be bouncing it around, and all of a sudden it just goes weightless. And what that means is the fish has already picked up the bait and swum off with it, and you haven't even felt the bite. And that happens a lot when the wind is blowing, because of the way that we fish the drop shot. When the wind gets over a certain speed, let's say 10 miles an hour, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain bottom contact with the movement of the boat, the wind blowing a bow in the line, that kind of stuff. So that does happen a lot when you are fishing a drop shot rig, is that weightless bite. It just feels like it's gone weightless. In super cold water situations, or after cold front has moved through, you may get a bite where it actually feels like a bait fish biting, like a bluegill, a small panfish or something like that biting, where it's in all cases with the drop shot, whatever, regardless of the bite, guys, we don't set the hook into the fish. We wind down and we just give a good sweep set. We don't pound them like you would do with other soft plastic fishing techniques. That will generally take the hook away from them. It's different when you're fishing with our EWG hook, like we've suggested for the big rig. But when you can imagine yourself with these tiny little hooks, if it's a big fish, there's a good chance it's going to straighten the hook out or snap it. And just with an average size fish, you may tear it out of the skin in the fish's mouth. So no giant hook sets on the drop shot rig. That's why we mentioned as well, with the type of rod, with the medium fast rod, the medium rod absorbs the fish pulling down on it, and obviously we're using lighter line, so with the medium rod that helps as well. It acts like a shock absorber when the fish wants to dive or run with it. A lot of the time, and guys, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, this technique is used primarily for smallmouth. You can absolutely use this technique for largemouth, but a lot of the time it's used for smallmouth, and smallmouth are notorious for fast runs or diving down when you get them up to the boat and that kind of stuff. and that rod just absorbs that shock of the fish trying to tear away, as we always say, and also stops the line from snapping because the rod takes the pressure, not the line. So let's talk about the time of year a little bit. Well, as you've seen in what we've discussed in the close-ups, you can kind of do this all year round. In fact, I think even if you were ice fishing, if you wanted to, you could drop shot through the ice. I think it would be an effective technique through the ice, because you can adjust the length of the distance between your sinker and your hook, keep it off the bottom, and suspend the bait off the bottom. And if you were drop shotting and you were through the ice and you were fishing for something like walleye or panfish or whatever the case is, you could even use a live bait. So I think drop shotting would be an awesome technique through the ice. So let's do it season by season. That'd probably be the smart way to do it. In the spring, in the pre-spawn and the spawn, this is a lethal technique. Bass are super aggressive in the pre-spawn. So they would be holding in their pre-spawn areas. They're easier to target. They're usually bunched up. There's normally a bunch of them together. So if you were fishing from a boat and you could find fish that were staging in the pre-spawn areas, which we'll look at, it's the same ones that we showed on the map. Go in there, pick a big bait like we discussed with the big drop shot technique, and literally sit on them and look for active fish and pound them. In the spawn, like we discussed with the spawn rig, with a very short distance between the sinker and the hook, and then some type of bait, you can literally put that bait in the nest and hop it up and down in front of their face until they get angry enough, eat it, or try to move it off the nest or whatever the case is. Post-spawn, for me, very similar to the pre-spawn. Fish are going to move back out to those kind of areas, start getting fed up, getting healthy, and then into the summer, with the giant rig that we spoke about, you could go and target fish offshore in offshore brush piles, maybe on ledges. And the advantage that you have of that is all you have to do is whatever bait you want to throw, upsize the hook, and then whatever depth of water you want to fish in, upsize the sinker. And then traditionally in fall, autumn, drop shotting is a lethal technique, particularly for smallmouth, but also for largemouth, because the fish are feeding up for going into the winter time. So if you can get around them, you can clean them up. Absolutely clean them up. And then in the winter, if you're lucky enough to live where there's no ice, then you would obviously just slow your presentation down, maybe downsize your bait slightly depending on what type of food is available to the bass in that body of water, and just go to work. If you're on a boat, target fish just using the forward-facing sonar if you have one on your boat, or just target fish that you've been able to mark on your sonar as you've been going over the fish. From the bank, it's absolutely a doable technique because it's a weight-forward technique for casting. You would have to fish in areas probably that are slightly cleaner bottom, because pulling back through vegetation to the bank would get nauseating after a while, especially if it's bushes and stuff and you keep breaking off and losing sinkers and whatever the case might be. So that's time of year. Water temperature. With this particular technique, I think the only major difference that water temperature would have on the technique itself is probably to slow down the presentation or speed up the presentation if the water was warmer. But again, it's not always the case. Sometimes when fish get into a funk in the dog days of summer, you would want to slow down your presentation. So like we said in several videos beforehand, you let the fish, the water, the temperature, the weather conditions dictate how the fish are going to eat that bait or what they want to eat on that particular day. What to look for when buying drop shot gear? It's like we've said before, guys. Buy the most expensive stuff you can afford within your budget. You will find a favorite brand of hooks and a favorite brand of sinkers that you can use. If you can afford them and the cover and structure allows it, always use tungsten drop shot sinkers. If, like me, you're not a very good drop shot fisherman, stick with the lead, because you are going to lose sinkers. If lead is legal in your state to use, and you are not confident, like I am, I have caught a lot of fish doing it, I'm still not confident throwing tungsten sinkers all the time. If I feel that there's a chance, an absolute chance I'm going to get stuck, I will revert back to the lead straight away. If I'm fishing on relatively clean open bottom, like gravel and stuff like that, maybe around boulders, whatever, where I'm confident it's not going to get hooked up, I will throw the tungsten. Absolutely. It helps you maintain better contact, better bottom contact. And then as far as the line and the braid is concerned, we've already spoken about that, but we'll touch on it again. Same deal, guys. Buy the most expensive stuff you can afford within your budget. This is a really simple technique, but it can be very, very effective. I hope you've learned something helpful today. I hope you all go out and try the drop shot rig. It's one of those techniques where you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a good result. You can use the existing baits, like we've discussed, the existing soft plastic baits that you already have in your collection, and you may just need to buy a couple of packets of hooks or a couple of packets of sinkers. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Get out there, try the drop shot rig. We'll see you next time.